Hi, welcome. As those of you joining us live are signing on, I want to introduce the Bookshop and welcome you to our conversation with Elliot Dark today. The Country Bookshop was founded in 1953 by two women, and we have had several owners over the years, most recently the Pilot newspaper, which bought the store in 2010. It is our great, genuine joy to be a part of your lives. And the only reason the bookstore exists is because you choose to shop with us. And the only reason we can have these wonderful conversations is because you choose to show up. And I cannot thank you enough for allowing us to be a part of your lives. I would like to welcome and briefly introduce Elliot Dark before we begin our conversation about Fellowship Point, now out in paperback. Elliot Dark is the author of the novels Fellowship Point and Think of England, and two collections of short stories, In the Gloaming and Naked to the Waist. Her work has appeared in, among others, The New Yorker, Harper's, Double Take, Plowshares, A Public Space, Best American Short Stories, Prize Stories, the O. Henry Awards, and has been translated into many languages. In the Gloaming, a story was chosen by John Updike for inclusion in the Best American Short Stories of the Century and made it into films by HBO and Trinity Playhouse. Her nonfiction reviews and essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many anthologies. She is a recipient of a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and an associate professor at Rutgers Newark in the English department in the MFA program. So welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, please start us off by just telling us a bit about the book before I jump in with all my questions.
It is, it's about a piece of land in Maine that's been passed down in families for 135 years or so. And the big question of the book, the big plot question, is what's going to happen to the land after the current owners, two of whom are 80, after they die. It's kind of a complicated situation of how the land is passed down, which I won't go into. It's all explained in the book, but it's also about these two women, Polly and Agnes, who've been friends since they were born, and their lifelong friendship. And in spite of having very different life choices and lifestyles and opinions and all, they're quite different, even though they have similar backgrounds. It's really about how they've managed to maintain this friendship for so long in such close proximity, and just the texture of their lives. There's another character, a young woman, who's also a point of view character. So she's really just as important. And she plays a big role in the changes that come towards the later part of the book. So a lot of it's really about daily life relationships, people interacting with each other, having, complicated situations to deal with. And it's about conservation and feminism and, themes too. So that's probably enough.
This book, I read it before it came out in hardcover, has been one of my favorite books of the last few years. And I can't.
Thank you.
It is. Yes, there's so much layering in here, even though it's a very tight story. Yes, a 3-sentence description can be tough. I want to start with, as I read, I don't think I paid all that much attention to the map in my first readings, but I wanted to begin by asking you about the map. When you open the paperback, it is after the two quotes, it is the first thing you see. Can you tell us about the map? I'm specifically curious, as you were writing the book, did you have a map drawn for yourself? When did the map come into play?
Well, that's how the map came into play. Fellowship Point is not a real place. I should say that. It's an invented place, even though many, many readers have told me they know exactly where it is. And I'm like, well, you can see into my brain then, because that's where it is. But it came about because as I was working on the book, and then, I would think, well, okay, William Lee, who founded the Point, wouldn't give himself the best house because he's not that kind of person. He would give it to his brother. So that means the brother's house has to be over here. And Polly and Agnes live next to each other. So that means Polly have to come in between those two houses. So I started putting it down on paper so I could actually see it. And then they would go take a walk in the graveyard. Okay, so where's the graveyard? And they're Quakers, so they had an outdoor meeting place where traditionally over all these decades, the people who come to the Point for the summer have a meeting, the equivalent of a meeting house, except they have it outside. So where's that? So, I just started graphing it on graph paper, and I ended up, let's see, I have it on the wall back here, the original, which really it's not a good look, but, it was enough to pass to, a real map maker who made it look good.
It does look good, and it's nice to have.
Yeah, I think so.
Heidi, Maud's mother, the woman you mentioned with the third point of view, has a beautiful line in the book about our minds being made by a weaver. And I'm wondering when this concept came to you. Is this something this line you had or picked up along the way, or did it just come out in your writing?
Everything just comes out when I'm writing, really. I often am asked, how did you do this? How did you do that? And the truth is, I can't remember, because I sit down, I try at least. It doesn't happen all the time because sometimes I'm just too distracted, but I try to go to a place where I'm just in the place, and I'm not thinking too much. I'm just letting the characters, letting the story flow through me, and then I'll go back and make it make sense in a certain way. But lines like that, they just come when I'm in that deeper place. It's, if I have any wisdom in me, it comes when I'm in that writing place, and then it just comes out. And so, like, I have no idea where that came from.
It's from the pocket. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Nan books, which Agnes wrote, they're such a connective force for your characters. And you choose to have the Nan books kind of academically considered by scholars. And I was wondering, and this may be just another writing thing, but I was wondering why you chose to add another layer of perspective to kind of consider Nan and what she means to people over time throughout the story.
I guess I wanted to have that come in for a couple of reasons. One was the difference between Agnes starting to write those books in the 1960s and not really having any kind of feminist agenda to writing them. As she says, like, Nan's just a regular girl who wants adventure, like regular girls do. Right. And that's the way she wrote it. But over time, to have it taken up as being these are early feminist classics, these books, and look at the way Nan behaves in the world, and to have it taken up by academia in that way as something to be studied, which Agnes thinks is hilarious. But I think this happens a lot. And I had this wonderful teacher at school who I went to school across from Bryn Mawr College, this wonderful women's college. And she had gone there, and she would take us over to look at the library full of PhD theses and say, especially when we looked at all the theses to be written on Billy Budd, it would be like Billy Budd's jacket or something, just like these sort of minutia, which really have value in the academic world, but it's a rarefied world. Right. And, she would say, just think about, is this what you want to do with your life? as if you love English now, are you going to want to do this later? And it was really kind of interesting to think about when we were younger, like this is where this kind of goes, studying. It narrows and narrows and narrows to where you're writing about the lantern in a book.
Right.
So it was sort of like, having the idea of these PhD theses written, and she has her papers at Penn where she went to school, to have these theses on the shelves of Penn. Now they would just be in a database, but to have them there, and just something she started writing because she had to make money and she was trying to entertain this child. I just thought I love how what happens to things over time compared to their original intention, and what people in other generations later make of them.
I really enjoyed thinking about it as well as I was reading it. And
what were your thoughts?
My thoughts were, well, right now they're clouded, of course, by what you just told me, and the narrowing and the beauty of creating something versus analyzing it. But actually, my thoughts were kind of grafted as I reread the book with a recent fiction novel I read, but that has to do with gay culture, and it's a romantic relationship over time. And they start out in college in the 60s, and at the end there's a young PhD student interviewing him about his movies that he's written, this fictional character, and really applying 2023 thinking in this movement, and just that comparative look over time.
Interesting. Very similar.
Yeah, very similar. It just in the ways, and I just think, I don't know, it's unfinished thoughts, but it's kind of flagged in my thinking right now of, and I'm not entirely sure how to articulate this well, but just movements over time, the feminist, Nan being a vision for the feminist movement and how we understand it and look at it, or just studying history in general. I just enjoyed.
I think it's just a really interesting question. And, I'm a professor, so it comes up all the time, like books that written in the past that might use language that's no longer acceptable, or concepts that have changed so much that they're offensive to students reading them, and how to think about people who lived in the past without entirely rejecting their reality. I think it's difficult and interesting.
And the nuance of it, so much, being in the South and really inviting authors for conversations that explore specifically North Carolina history, and all the weightiness of that, and inviting room for nuanced conversations is something I'm really interested in. And I find that even in the publishing world and in a lot of thinking, there's not necessarily room for, well, you talk, one of my questions in here is about wholeness. But I think about wholeness as we look at history, and try to look at it less in extremes and applying our reality to it.
It was one reason I loved Charles Frazier's book Cold Mountain so much about North Carolina, because he did not center it on the slavery issue. I mean, it was very much present, but he's also writing about these mountain towns and, these people who are nowhere close to owning slaves. They don't have anywhere near that kind of money. He has both. And he also has the boys up in the mountains with the natives, and having relationships between them. And I really appreciated that book so much. I mean, I don't even know if he could even publish it now, but because that was even in a different time when, right. But I thought, I mean, history's complicated, and, we very much want to tell ourselves clean, simple stories, but why? It's so much richer to hear like experiences of all different people and their perspectives. And, some people we might just say, well, you're just plain wrong. Fine, but that's fine. But it doesn't help to just, I don't know. I mean, this is a big subject and we could go way down the road with it, but I appreciate and understand what you're saying.
Well, thank you. Excuse me for the pause. It is a big subject, but I think that's what fiction can do that other things cannot, is allow for the nuance and examining. And I apologize for getting distracted as we're getting to the meat of the conversation, but I like the way you do it in Fellowship Point with marriage. I mean, the way you explore. Well, let me get back to my official notes here. In Fellowship Point,
Sorry.
No, this is the good stuff. You deeply explore the institution of marriage through Polly and Dick's relationship. What was it that you wanted to explore in this marriage? Did it just serve kind of as a contrast to Agnes? Or are you exploring the way society views marriage as like almost the original subjugation of women? I enjoyed, the beauty of Fellowship Point is everything is over time. And it allows you to more deeply explore these nuances, the greater minutia that really makes up everything, as we were just speaking about. And I was wondering what you were looking to explore. It's such a rich relationship to mine things out of.
I think that's a really good segue from talking about Cold Mountain, for example, of, obviously people are living within institutions and we understand they have massive effects on people who are even not aware of, the fact that they're living within an institution like marriage. And, Polly goes into the institution of marriage without thinking about it, except who am I going to marry? That's
Right.
That's sort of her thought when she's 20, not thinking, is this like a lifestyle I want to live? Is this going to bring me the fulfillment that I am seeking? Because she's very bright and she has a lot of capabilities and thoughts, and I think she's hoping that just by magic it will be fulfilling to her, but she's not really asking the hard questions about the institution and is it a great lifestyle for her, or is it at the point that she's entering into it a lifestyle that's more restrictive on women than it is on men. So I think just following her path, as you said, for over time, and seeing how her thoughts do change over time, at least about herself. I think when she's very young, we see a scene when she visits friends.
Yeah.
She visits girls that she knows, and they're all married. They're all young marrieds, and they're all very similar, similar backgrounds, upper middle class, probably. Some of them maybe even more money than that. But, people, young women who are old enough to have like a house or an apartment that is nice. And yeah,
I think in that scene, you say that it wasn't new, but it was all hers, like the friend who's hosting them. It was,
yeah,
they
exactly.
furniture, but it belonged to her.
Exactly. And during that scene, they're kind of having a polite tea party, and it's an opportunity for them to suddenly act like grown-ups. And, she's had lunch at the club with her mother just before, and her mother talks to her differently than she ever had before, because now she's a married woman. So, the mother feels like a certain kind of different affinity with her. So this is all like new to her. And yet at that tea party, there's a woman who suddenly starts crying, sort of sobbing, saying, I married this stranger. He's a weirdo. I don't even recognize him. What am I doing? And they're all kind of horrified by this, and embarrassed that someone's showing so much emotion at this, rather formal meeting. But she's interested, she's like, wow. And then she has her own memory, she remembers like when she had thoughts of like, who is this guy I'm bringing into parties with me? His legs look so weird to me. I think this is a very common experience after you get into a deep relationship with someone. Like, you look at them one day and say, that's a total stranger. Why is he in my house? Or why is he in my room? Or, what are we doing here? And she goes through the whole process during that scene of really thinking this through and talking to the woman. She takes the train with her. She wants to talk to her a little more about this whole sort of feeling of questioning and rebellion. And then at the end of it, she just decides, okay, I'm never going to question this again. I made the choice. I'm just going to live this. I'm going to live the life. And she decides at the end of that scene that now she's ready to have children, because she's sort of gone through her dark night of the marriage soul. And, she's just going to do this.
What was so interesting to me about that scene and that conversation too, is that Polly, because Polly is so, her core, when it bubbles up, is so profound, but she recognizes that society would fall apart. Like literally, society would fall apart if marriage wasn't, if everyone shared these stories about their marriage. And that line struck me in it.
Yeah.
Because
I think she realizes it, something that women realize more and more in the 50s and in the 60s, when there was big feminist it really was a revolution of, ask the questions and institutions blow apart, with all the institutions. And she has a very strong sense of that. Like, if I go down this road of asking myself, like, why did I marry this guy? Is he the right guy? If I go down that road, I'm not going to end up in any place that I want to be.
Right. And just knowing there's a couple of, I enjoy, your characters have some really interesting traits, intelligence traits, or how they control their thinking that I really appreciated. Agnes, you had this line of where she shifts her intelligence. She's driving to go chat with Archie and thinking about all these other things. And you use the term shifts her intelligence and that line of focus. And then Maud, the way she deals with a coworker, just this power of this profound ability to control their own minds and control their thinking, which I consider a lot in real life, but I don't always read in fiction. And I was wondering if about the deep powers of intelligence that you give to some of these characters. And I was wondering if you find these traits rare in people in real life, or I know you just wrote and they all appear, but I'm wondering if you could speak to the way your characters are able to control their thinking.
I don't think they're rare in real life. I think when I think of my friends, I think all of them who have done some deep thinking about who they are and how they want to be in the world have developed ways of managing thoughts that are not going to be beneficial. I don't think it's entirely natural to just be able to choose your best behavior. I think it's a very cultivated practice, and I think it's a practice really worth cultivating. it's certainly at the center of a lot of religions and philosophies, how to cultivate our thoughts and behaviors to the good of society and to the good of our, how we want to go through our day. I mean, of course, we get irritated and angry, probably on a daily basis at something. Do we want to, display and enact anger every single time we have those feelings? Or do we want to create a method that we can step through those feelings and, have a more possibly societally, beneficial approach to our own internal, moods and storms. And I do think about that a lot. I've always thought about it a lot since I was young, because I looked at these teachers I had at school who I thought were very mentally disciplined people.
Mhm.
And my grandmother too, who was always the same. And, my mother would say, she's so boring. And I'd say, it's hard to be that way. It's hard. It's like, I go over to her house after school, she's the same. And I really appreciate that, because it's not that she wasn't, fun and interesting and all of that, but she was reliably a certain calm way. And, it was never like a big shock. And I really thought, that's so hard. How does she do it? And as I got to know her a little better, I got to know more about how she did it, and certain just practices she had in her life, like she read poetry in bed every night, like, really great poems that I think were very centering to her and that sort of thing. And I just wanted to give that to some of these, that kind of impulse towards self-development and cultivation of beneficial mental habits to these characters. I think just because I value that.
I'm wondering, you mentioned that your friends, you've enjoyed it since you're young, but it's your grandmother you reference and your friend. The book beautifully considers and reflects on aging, in the basic moments of it, but also control and over your life and legacy. And it is one, when I sell this book and when I'm talking about this book to people who come in the store, I'm like, it's a friendship over time, but it also holds what it is to be at the end of your life, moving towards the end. There's one quote that resonated a lot with me, to describe this moment. Agnes says, but there was a last time, an unforeseen and uncommemorated last time. I don't remember it. And that more than anything describes aging to me, the letting go of one activity after the next with no fanfare, just realizing later that the last time has come and gone. And I was like, that describes some aging that I've witnessed in various people over time. And I'm wondering, as this book has been in the world now for over a year and inspired, no doubt, many conversations, what you know about how people have held and considered and reflected on aging as they are reading this book.
Something that has been a really happy surprise to me, and it really was a total surprise, because I honestly did not think when I was writing this book of it being an identity novel for older women. The characters came to me. I didn't choose to have them on purpose, but they came to me, and then as they went out into the world, I just thought of them as literary characters. It could be David Copperfield, a child. They were literary characters to me. I didn't think it's about them in particular as being older. But as they went out into the world, I began to get a lot of letters and conversations with women, let's say between 75 and 95, maybe even a little older. I think I've had a few older women, who really seriously appreciated seeing women like this on the page, women who had traits that they were themselves, that were still compos mentis, that were still physically active to various degrees, feeling like growing and changing, learning in the middle of their lives, and not just as they felt that in many, many novels they had read, the 80-year-old women were sort of like, let's go to Granny's for Thanksgiving dinner,
They're
just
totally flat. They're totally flat.
yeah, not like people. And I kept, I had a talk with a young woman who said, she loved seeing that. And I said, well, I really, I wanted to make them as in life and full of future as 30-year-old men, just like the potential level is that. But I also did want to write about the reality of they are approaching the end of their life. They're thinking about it. They're not in denial about it at all. They're aware of how things have changed for their bodies. They're aware of, things in each other that are not as sharp as it used to be, all of these things. So I wanted it to be realistic too. And I think they came to me as characters when I was writing this book, because I've always just been fascinated by old women. I think I had opportunities when I was a child to be around old women, really old women. And I just thought, wow, they are free. Of all the people I saw in my young life, I thought we went to see my grandmother's great aunts. So that's 2 generations above her. Every Sunday, like after church, she would take me over. They lived in this big house, which I later learned was like a nursing home. But I thought it was like, they live in this big house, they have candy, they paint, they just have their whole day, they can do whatever they want. And I thought, these are like the freest people on earth. So I was very fascinated at that. And then as I got older, I think I started to understand that a lot of the freedom of old women comes from no one's paying any attention to them. They're kind of invisible. But I also think that's a double-edged sword. In some ways that's convenient, but I think it ignores the tremendous political value that older women have and the potential that older women have. I mean, older women are at this moment doing major things. I just read an article that the most active people around climate solutions, change, ideas are women like over 65. They're just like very, very focused on doing what they can to make a better future for everyone. It's a huge political will. And I think people just forget that there's a lot of intelligence and power.
I wonder if I think that's true. I've also always been fascinated by old women. But I think also the fact that they are old women allows their friendship to be the most interesting part of the novel, and to hold that friendship over time and witness what they've witnessed, and have someone have a friend witness companion throughout your life in that way, and a place for your wisdom, and your wisdom to hold back or your wisdom to speak. And it is the most beautiful thing. And even as I was trying to figure out how to talk to you and ask about their friendship, I realized I didn't even have the words. I couldn't figure out what words to describe the closeness that is friendship over time. And I'm wondering, you set a lot of their conversations in the graveyard, which I think is such a wonderful way to convey what they've witnessed, what they know not to talk about, what they've been through together, who's come and gone. And I'm wondering if you could talk about friendship, the how it forms, how we carry it over time, and what it was to write their friendship.
I think the idea of having a lifelong friendship, really from cradle to grave, is so alluring and something of a fantasy for, it's a fantasy to have someone like that, not a sibling, not a cousin, a friend. A friend, they know each other really well. They know each other's families. They've gone through lots of difficult losses with each other. And I loved writing about their relationship. And one of the things I loved writing about is how much silence exists between them. They have a lot of banter, and they get together every day and they talk every day. They meet every day in the summers. They meet every day and they talk, but so many of the things that they know about each other and that are important to them about each other are things that they don't talk about. And in a lot of ways, that is the rich texture of their relationship, that they don't have to analyze everything. They know, they were there. Agnes was there when Polly lost a child. She saw. They don't have to, they don't have to discuss it all the time. On the other hand, their habit and practice of not expressing displeasure and irritation with each other adds up, and it comes in a part of the novel where it comes out. They do keep a lot of their disapproval or thoughts about each other to themselves. I mean, Polly's very aware that Agnes does not think highly of her husband, Dick. Agnes doesn't say it all the time, but Polly is 100% aware all the time that every time Agnes was with Dick, she is judging Dick. If they talked about that all the time, they couldn't be friends. So Polly just lets it go. But there is like a price to pay for not discussing certain things, and it does come out. But I really liked the idea, and I love what you said, noticing that they choose the graveyard to go into, because there's a silence in those relationships too. They can't speak with these people anymore. And I think the solace of being able to be there together, and they give each other space when they're in the graveyard to have their private mourning moments about some of the people who are buried there. They don't have to talk about it, and I'm not advocating anything one way or the other. I'm just exploring how these two people do. And I mean, it was very centering to me to think about that, and to realize that some of the relationships I've had in my own life, where nothing important or serious has ever been discussed, have been very rich anyway. I mean, anyone who has a pet knows that.
Right. That's a really interesting analogy, but exactly. I really enjoyed watching their friendship as well. And you say a friendship over a lifetime is a rare thing. Have you known any friendships from cradle to grave almost like
I
this?
have friends from kindergarten, because I went to the same school from kindergarten through 12th, and it was a girls' school. So those relationships were, I mean, a lot of them were very much like this. Some of these people I've reconnected with recently who I haven't been connected with for a long time, but there is, I'm sure you'll recognize, and people will recognize, when you know someone when you're a child, you go into their house, you know their siblings, you know the food that you know a lot of where they came from. It's very easy to pick up again. You don't have to explain who you are. They don't have to explain who they are. So a lot of these friendships were very easy to pick up again. And there is a lot of quiet in these relationships, but they're very strong too. So I guess I haven't had a relationship like Agnes and Polly, where I have had a friend over the course of my life. I'm not as old as they are, but over the course of my life, who's been continuous. But I have had very deep friendships. So I did draw on that. I do think a lot of the friendships I've had that haven't lasted have come to grief over maybe not holding back in certain moments. And, I was sort of raised like, if you're mad at your friend, give it a few days,
Right.
give it a few days, let it go, come back together. But the world has changed a lot around that. Now it's like, if you're mad, say something right away, and have like a confrontation, which I think is a wonderful idea. I do think most people don't have the training to have that confrontation without it going wrong, and I think so many movies and TV shows and things we read are depictions of those conversations going wrong, people starting to say cruel things to each other, not being able to talk about an issue that's bothering them, but like starting to attack. And, Agnes and Polly avoid that, but they maybe avoid a little more than they should. I don't know,
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of watching it, but because it's avoiding over time, it
Yeah.
begs the question, can to a marriage, to a friendship, like, are you avoiding to get the years? Is that the only path to the years?
I mean, it's definitely true. It's so true in her marriage to Dick.
Mhm.
She knew who he was. She had no illusions, that he was not a resilient person. He had an early career disappointment. He never really recovered from it. He wasn't a great guy. He was an average guy, He was a nice dad, but not a particularly attentive. He was fine, and she just accepted the limitations. She could have been yelling at him all the time.
Right.
Many readers have said to me they hated Dick. And I said, I don't hate Dick at all. I think he's just limited,
But I think that's what makes their marriage so interesting to think about, because even the most exceptional man, when you're married to them, is limited.
Yeah.
Like,
We're all limited. We're all
yeah.
limited. And, I do think I've been married for 35 years now. And I really think, everybody goes through periods where they imagine other lives. But I do think there's a value to sticking with something because, I think you get to the stage where you realize it's really just about you. It's not them.
Right.
They're just a person, they're just a person. Like, and if they're not making your life amazing, is that really what they're supposed to be doing, or are you supposed to be doing that? And it's sort of like being a writer. I think if you have a relationship with a long book, there's a lot of parts of writing a long book that are difficult and boring. And, you would much rather be going swimming that day than like sitting with the book. But you've made like a larger commitment to do this thing. So you do it. And then there is a payoff. There is a payoff when everything starts to work and you feel that I hate the word sacrifice in terms of things like this, because I think it has a very profound meaning and it's not really choices that you're making, but like just choosing, okay, I'm going to sit and work on my book instead of like go to lunch with a friend. There is something down the road, and it's not always the right choice. Sometimes you should have gone with a friend, but there's the big picture, and I think those are kind of big picture situations.
I think of it as putting, you say down the road, as you just put one foot in front of the other, as painful as it is, because you're on the road,
Yeah.
you're just,
Yeah. And I think, I liked writing about that marriage because really, it's, as I said, many people have said they couldn't stand Dick and they just thought Polly was thwarted by him. I'm like, but there's nothing wrong with Dick. He's not abusing her. He's not like someone who you could just say, you have to get a divorce. If she were going to go around to all her friends and say, should I get a divorce? Which she doesn't. But if she were, it would be like, because he's limited, he's kind of dull, he's self-absorbed. Well, so are many, many people, and so it just becomes about you. Like, what do you make of it? And she makes a great life of her life. She has a rich life in spite of, maybe she could have had a better marriage, but she has that marriage. She makes a rich life anyway. And I'm not saying anything about what women should do. It's not prescriptive. I'm just saying,
here's this marriage.
Yeah,
Talk
exactly.
about it. Think about it. Which is such a gift, because you talk about sitting with a long book, and this book, it is, I think I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, it is so layered, so complex, so many relationships, but it's tight. There, the beauty of your writing in Fellowship Point is how everything's woven together. It's so tight. It's really a beautiful work. It makes sense that you couldn't go swimming in with friends because you had to neaten this to tuck it all in so it works, but it's a gift in that way. And I'm wondering about, as you're writing it, Heidi's story, Maud's story, how you wove this. We've got the marriage, the friendship, we have the environment, we have the native, we have Quaker, you have so much in here. And I want to ask about this process of writing. You mentioned that you just write, you mentioned there's a lot of slogging through to make the book like this. I'm wondering if, and you could talk to this book specifically. Did you have Heidi's story in one box and then weave it into Polly's story, or for the
Pretty much. Yeah,
brothers?
it was pretty much like that. The characters Virgil came first. He was the first character, and then Polly, and then Robert, and then Agnes, and then Maud. So, but that was over a period of a few years. So I'm writing into each of those characters. Like, they come into my mind and then I'm just writing about them. And then I start to write scenes of them with each other, and Robert and Polly was very rich. It's not that much is left in the book, but their relationship was very rich. And I started to understand both of them from that relationship. That was another relationship I really loved, that I felt was full of profound levels of just sort of acceptance, and not needing anything too heavy, but except for lifelong knowledge of each other. And Agnes with Robert too, although theirs is a little more complicated. But I think I wrote about 1,600 pages altogether of all the character, everything. And then the process of making it into a plot and a story was a lot about, well, I knew I wanted something to happen later in the book that would be what we call something like a reveal. I really wanted it to be more like a coincidence, something where something that was set up would have a payoff. That I do think coincidence happens all the time in real life, but that it's not as much seen in literature because it's sort of seen like as being like a trick. I don't know, but I don't think that, I don't think that at all. So I wanted something like that. So then I knew, so then I would look into what I had written, like where could that energy happen? Like around which plot line could that happen? And just started having, making decisions like that, and thinking a lot about, I mean, one of the reasons I think the book is so long is because I think it's hard to make it believable that people change. We know how hard it is to change, really change profoundly. And I felt like I needed to show a lot of scenes along the way of all three of those major women characters to make you feel at the end when they all do change in pretty fundamental worldview kind of ways, that we had seen that and it was organic, and it wasn't imposed. It wasn't me trying to make them a certain way. It was them, so that was a lot of the way the book was built too. Like, in this scene with Polly and Agnes having lunch with people from the land trust, how do we see them at this point in the story? The way they're behaving, the way they're thinking, and then the next time we see them with that issue, what's going to happen to the land? Has something in the meantime changed to make them have a different perspective? Okay, so what would that be? So then figure out that scene that would come in between.
That's a wonderful description. I'm thinking about it as you're saying it, but of how to architect that and your thinking on that. I have asked anyone joining us live, if you have a question, please type it in the chat as we are nearing the end of our conversation. But I want to ask, what's on your mind now? At earlier in our chat, our conversation was meandering and it is fascinating, but just how much one can pull out of Fellowship Point. It's obvious that you are thinking and looking at so many different things in the world now as we understand how you've written them into here. I'm wondering what is just in general across the board top of mind for you now as you're working on your next book, but just what are you watching unfold? What is of interest to you? What are you kind of noodling on?
Well, that's a really good question. I suppose that the issues of the day, of course, concern me, because I basically have a very live and let live feeling towards life and people. I do feel concerned about many efforts now to legislate each other that are going on in all kinds of directions. I'm not even going to name a particular issue. I just think I see a lot of impulse towards, instead of like, hey, let's all, this is a big country, we can all live here. No, let's control this group of people. Let's control that group of people. Let's make it harder for this group of people to do this and that. That concerns me because I don't think it's the spiritual reality of why we're here. So I'm thinking a lot about that. And I'm thinking about, in the very other direction, a lot about personal development and spiritual development. And I think about, my teaching practice has changed so much from when I was younger, when I really tried to give like, this is how you make a plot, this is how you write a character. Now I'm so much more about, this is how you become a wise person. This is how you develop yourself so you'll have something to say, because the craft part of it is not it's not the most important thing. It's like, do you understand who you are enough to create characters who are rich, Do you understand your human nature? Starting with yourself. Can you be self-honest? Can you understand what your flaws are that maybe other people are having trouble with, all that kind of thing. And I think about that a lot, and I try to bring that into my teaching practice. So I read a lot of books that are spiritual in nature. I'm reading a wonderful book right now, which I have it right here, so I'll just show you. It's called Nine Gates, Exploring the Mind of Poetry by Jane Hirschfield, who's a great poet, one of America's great poets. It's such an interesting collection of essays about concentration and how poetry came into being. I think it's a much bigger book than a book about poetry. I don't think that subtitle entirely explains how this could be interesting to anybody, but it's, so I'm thinking about that too. And I'm thinking about it in terms of the book I'm writing. And yeah, I just think maybe it's age, and maybe it's having gone through the pandemic, and maybe I don't even know what, but I'm just much more drawn right now to not looking at not dwelling on dark things, I should say. Looking at them, but in balance, like with other things. So in the book that I'm writing, and Fellowship Point too, trying to write about people who have a sense of that they want to be what we call good people. They want to be good people, and what gets in the way? How does it get in the way? And how do people go off the track of that and then bring themselves back to center? So that's a lot what I'm thinking about.
It's interesting because in Fellowship Point, an undercurrent is wholeness. Who's whole, who's not? How do we view the fact that we're not whole? And it seems almost a precursor to where your thinking seems to be now, on a larger wholeness. Thinking about Dick not being whole, Agnes when she leaves, John being able to leave whole because she didn't accept the shame he wanted to put on her. It was really interesting undercurrents throughout the book.
Well, thank you so much for noticing those things.
Oh my gosh, it's such a beautiful book, Alice. And this is I read all the time. I harassed your publicist to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. I'm so glad, because you've been unbelievably thoughtful. Your questions are very profound. So you must be a brilliant reader.
Well,
and person.
Well, I love good books, and I love books that give me so much to think about and consider. And I love a beach read too. I love a basic plot line, rom-com character thing, but a book like what you've written where I could take a whole, there's a reason academics end up writing about the blue coat.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
There is. I didn't mean to.
No. But your book gives so much. You could write about the artifacts. There's just 50 dissertations that could be taken out of this.
Thank you. That's a great thing to say.
It's true. And that kind of thinking in what you give in the book that allows us as a reader to do our own mental dance is such a gift. And I can't wait to see when the next one comes out. We are at our last minute, and I do want to tell you, I am reading this book right now called Our Tribal Future that just came out, and I'm in the middle of it, but it's I just wanted to put it on your radar. It's how to channel our foundational human instincts into a force for good. But it is
that sounds good. I'm writing it down.
It is big, it's nonfiction. It goes into the history of our species, like community kindness. how we developed as humans. And then it's going to get to today. And I've been fascinated with thinking about tribes and humanity and how we connect and in group and out group. And I have not found good nonfiction books about it. And believe me, I've been searching. And so this one has come out. So I wanted to give that to you for your thinking.
Thank you. I mean, let me just quickly ask you, do you feel like you see more of that in fiction than you do in nonfiction?
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
fiction is where
Interesting.
one is able to explore truth because it's mercurial and it is taking all these, I think of it like a circle, you're getting closer and closer to the truth. And it's to me, it's like a 3D thing. And a little bit more magical. Like you can do that stuff in fiction and get closer to the truth in ways you can't in nonfiction. But you need, to your point of your teaching, that all the experience, you need the nonfiction to get to the truth in fiction.
Yeah. It all has a place.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. This was really quite an experience. Wonderful.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to being in touch and
Okay, good. I'd like to be in touch.
good. I'll follow up.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, Alice. Bye.
Bye-bye.